Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to replace the factory JBL head unit on a 2004 Toyota Sequoia with an aftermarket CarPlay head unit. This video is valid for all Toyota Sequoia models in the first generation, which goes from the model years 2001 through 2007. You can find links to all the parts you need in the video description below. So let's get right into it. Before you start working on any electrical components in the car, always remember to disconnect the negative terminal on the battery under the hood. The first step is to remove this trim piece which surrounds the radio. It's held in by two Phillips screws. Once you remove the screws, you'll need to use a plastic pry tool to pry the trim piece off. Always cover the end of the plastic pry tool with something soft, like a paper towel, to prevent it from scratching the surrounding plastic on the dash. Now we have complete access to the radio. It is held in by four 10mm bolts. Once you remove the four bolts, you'll need to remove these two cables, the power antenna and the radio antenna signal, and the two electrical connectors as shown. Now the factory radio is completely out and we can move on to installing our new double-DIN unit. The factory radio has these two metal brackets on the side which we will need to reuse. You can use a Phillips screwdriver to remove the bolts holding them in. The double-DIN unit we'll be installing is a Sony XAV-AX 1000. You will also need a Metra wiring harness for Toyota vehicles with the part number as shown. In the box, obviously you have the double-DIN unit, the microphone, and the wiring harness for the double-DIN unit. In the next video in this series, we will also be installing a backup camera wired to this unit. I'll be covering the actual installation, wire routing, and placement of the backup camera in the next video in this series. Now we can move on to the next step, which is splicing the wiring harness for the double-DIN and the Metra wiring harness together. We're going to be using butt connectors for this. Here is a wiring diagram which shows which color wire on the Sony side needs to be spliced onto the Metra harness side. For the backup camera, you need to connect this red wire to the purple wire with a white stripe on the Sony harness. There are two wires, one on the Sony side and the other on the Metra harness side, which need to be soldered together and connected to a suitable ground point on the chassis. The black wire with the white stripe on the Metra harness, which is the amplifier ground, and the green wire on the Sony side, which is the park gear interlock. As you can see, I'm crimping the two wires together using a ring terminal. A bolt will go through the hole in the ring terminal and screw onto the chassis. This connects the two wires to the chassis ground. Now we can install our two mounting brackets onto the new double-DIN unit. We need to use these two holes as shown. The screws required for this come in the double-DIN unit box. Next, we can start plugging in the harness and the various wires into the back of the stereo. First, connect the wiring harness which was provided with the double-DIN, followed by the speaker low-level inputs. Make sure to follow the color coding as shown. Next is the backup camera feed signal cable. And finally, the microphone cable. Now all that's left to do is to install the stereo kit around the radio so that the install is nice and clean with no space around the double-DIN. You just have to press it on as shown. Before we move on to installing the new radio, I'd like to show you how I found the chassis ground point for the amplifier ground cable and the parking brake interlock. The chassis ground point we need generally can be any bare, unpainted metal surface on the car. One example of this is the seat bolt which is located behind this cover. This point obviously is a little too far to route the wires from the double-DIN unit. So we need to find a point in this area which is much closer to the unit. Looking at the area, I noticed this bolt hole. If you remember when we removed the four bolts holding the radio into the chassis, one of those four bolts actually fits into this hole. So this is perfect for us as we need a bolt that goes through the ring terminal and then screws into the chassis. But we still need to make sure that this is a good electrical ground point. To do this, you'll need a multimeter. Set the multimeter to continuity mode as shown. In this mode, the multimeter will beep if there is an electrical connection between the two leads, like so. Connect one of the leads to the seat bolt and the other to the point of the chassis that we want to test. We can hear a beep, which means that this point is actually connected to the vehicle chassis and we can use it as our ground point. Don't forget to connect the radio signal cable into this slot as shown. You also need to route the backup camera and the microphone cables through the dash and under as shown. Unfortunately, I couldn't get footage of me doing this as it requires two hands and quite a bit of effort, but it's not too hard and you should be able to figure it out. Connect the Metra wiring harness on the double DIN unit side onto the factory wiring harness on the vehicle side as shown. Now you can place the double DIN unit in and line up the bolt holes to install it. Install the four 10mm bolts to hold the radio down. In my case, I'll only be using 3 of them as I'm using the 4th bolt to screw the ring terminal down onto the chassis ground. Here is where I do that. If you like, you can tape up the unused power antenna cable with electrical tape just to be on the safe side. Now we can reinstall the trim piece around the radio, which just snaps into place. Don't forget the 2 Phillips screws holding it down. Go ahead and reconnect the negative terminal on the battery under the hood and tighten the nut. As you can see, if you follow all the steps shown, the radio should work just fine.
A health emergency declared by officials in Peru over a sudden surge in Guillain-Barré syndrome, one of the potential side effects to COVID-19 shots.
So that brings us to the end of today's video. If you liked it and would like to watch more of my content, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button down below. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.